There is a word hiding on most English muffin packages that the baking industry has spent decades making sure you never stop to read. It sits right there on the front, usually beneath the brand name, sometimes tucked into the ingredient list, and it legally allows a manufacturer to remove real flour, replace the texture with a cocktail of conditioners and gums, keep the product shelf-stable for weeks, and still print words like wholesome, natural, and baked fresh on the same package. The hidden receipt went through every major English muffin brand currently on American shelves. We pulled ingredient lists, cross-referenced USDA and FDA standards, traced corporate ownership, reviewed every recall and safety action filed in the last decade, and contacted independent food testing data wherever it existed. What we found is that most of what sits in the bread aisle under the English muffin label has almost nothing in common with the thing Thomas's invented in the 1880s. Real English muffins have 5 ingredients: flour, water, yeast, salt, and a small amount of fat. That is the complete list. Everything beyond that was added for one reason: to extend shelf life, cut ingredient costs, or simulate a texture that cheaper flour cannot naturally produce. 8 brands are going to fail that standard in ways that range from disappointing to genuinely alarming. 3 brands made a different choice entirely. By the end of this, you will know exactly which ones to put back on the shelf and exactly which ones are worth your money. One number before we start. The FDA does not have a minimum quality standard for English muffins the way the USDA has a milk fat threshold for ice cream. That absence of regulation is precisely why this category is so easy to exploit. Without a legal floor, manufacturers can do almost anything to the formula and still call it an English muffin. Keep that regulatory gap in mind. It explains every single brand on the avoid list. We start with lower concern and build toward the most serious. Then we flip it and give you the 3 brands that looked at the same shelves and chose differently. Number 8. Walmart Great Value English Muffins. This is the budget entry. Under $2 for 6 muffins. Before you open the package, press on the bag. The muffins compress almost completely and spring back without resistance, like a sponge shaped into a disc. That physical behavior is the ingredient list expressing itself. When you read that list, you find enriched bleached flour, high fructose corn syrup, calcium propionate, sodium stearoyl lactylate, mono and diglycerides, and datum, diacetyl tartaric acid ester of monoglycerides, a synthetic dough conditioner used to strengthen gluten networks that cheap flour cannot build on its own. Real English muffin dough does not need a synthetic dough conditioner. It builds structure through time, hydration, and natural fermentation. Datum is there because the fermentation was skipped. Calcium propionate is there because without it, a muffin this low in natural preserving fats would mold within days. The mold resistance is not a quality feature. It is evidence that the product was never designed around fresh ingredients in the first place. Split one and toast it. The nooks and crannies, the defining textural characteristic of an English muffin, the reason you buy one instead of a slice of bread, are sparse, shallow, and uniform. Real fermentation creates an uneven, deeply pocketed crumb structure because gas bubbles form irregularly during a slow rise. What you see in Great Value is an engineered approximation, chemically consistent, texturally flat. The kind of muffin that absorbs butter because it has no structure to hold it at the surface. Walmart generated over $700 billion in revenue last year. Sourcing cleaner grain and cutting the synthetic conditioners is not a financial constraint at that scale. It is a margin decision. The 70 cents you saved came with an ingredient panel that a food chemist would recognize immediately as the signature of industrial minimization. Number 7. Pepperidge Farm Toasted English Muffins. Pepperidge Farm has been on American shelves since 1937. The red bag, the old-fashioned lettering, the brand that signals something a step above the standard grocery shelf. It costs more than the Walmart option. It implies a heritage commitment to quality that the ingredient panel does not support. Open the bag and you find enriched bleached flour as the base, which is the first signal that cost was prioritized over nutrition. The bran and germ, the parts of the wheat kernel that contain fiber, vitamins, and natural flavor, have been stripped out, and the flour has been bleached with chemical agents that whiten the crumb and extend shelf life. The nutrients removed in processing are then added back synthetically as niacin, reduced iron, thiamine mononitrate, riboflavin, and folic acid. You are paying for grain that was made nutritionally inferior and then chemically patched. The ingredient list continues with datum, calcium sulfate, the same compound used in construction drywall, sodium stearoyl lactylate, and soy lecithin. 4 separate dough conditioners and emulsifiers in a product that the packaging implies is baked with care. Real baking does not require 4 emulsifiers. 1 emulsifier is already a signal. 4 is a full admission that the flour and fermentation are not doing the structural work on their own. Pepperidge Farm is owned by the Campbell Company, over $10 billion in annual revenue. Independent glyphosate testing on Pepperidge Farm whole grain bread products has consistently returned among the highest residue numbers of any branded bread in independent laboratory databases. The English muffin line has not been independently published with the same granularity, but the wheat sourcing infrastructure is the same. The brand carries a 2.4-star average rating across major consumer platforms. Reviewers consistently report a chemical off-taste texture that dries out within a day of opening, and a price that keeps rising for a product that keeps declining. Number 6. Nature's Own English Muffins. The name is doing a lot of work. Natural, wholesome. A product that implies it came from somewhere intentional and honest. Flowers Foods is the parent company. $5 billion in annual revenue. Nature's Own is their flagship consumer brand, and it occupies shelf space in virtually every major grocery chain in the country. The muffin contains calcium propionate, datem, sodium stearoyl lactylate, and soy lecithin. The base flour is enriched bleached wheat flour, stripped, bleached, fortified synthetically. What is absent from the ingredient panel is almost more informative than what is present. No mention of fermentation time, no sourdough culture, no natural leavening beyond commercial yeast. The entire rise in texture development was achieved chemically, not through time. In July 2025, a class action lawsuit was filed in California federal court alleging that Flowers Foods falsely markets certain Nature's Own products as containing no artificial preservatives. Calcium propionate appears on the ingredient labels of multiple Nature's Own products. Flowers Foods has denied the allegations, but the case has been certified and is proceeding. That is not a rounding error on a label. That is a company building a marketing identity around a claim that its own ingredient panel contradicts. Squeeze the bag before you open it. That pillowy give does not feel like bread. It feels like engineered foam. A product that compresses to nothing and springs back without tearing has been formulated for a retail shelf and a supply chain, not for a human breakfast. Number 5. Bay's English Muffins. Bay's has a positioning advantage that most of its competitors do not. It is sold refrigerated. Sitting in the dairy case next to the butter and eggs, Bay's carries an implicit freshness signal that shelf-stable muffins cannot claim. Shoppers reach for it specifically because refrigerated implies less preserved, more natural, closer to something made in a bakery that morning. The ingredient list complicates that inference significantly. Enriched bleached flour, calcium propionated, sodium stearoyl lactylate, DAT-M, potassium sorbate, an additional preservative on top of calcium propionated, used specifically to inhibit mold and yeast in the finished product. 2 separate antimicrobial preservatives in a refrigerated product. Real refrigeration replaces preservatives. If a muffin is genuinely fresh and kept cold from production through retail, it does not need calcium propionate and potassium sorbate. The presence of both in a refrigerated product tells you the refrigeration is a merchandising decision, not a formulation one. The muffin was not made to be fresh and then kept cold. It was made with a full preservative load, and then placed in the dairy case because that positioning commands a higher retail price and a different category of consumer trust. Bay's has been producing English muffins in Chicago since 1933. The refrigerated case heritage is genuine. The ingredient list suggests the formulation philosophy has moved considerably from wherever it started. Number 4. Thomas's Original English Muffins. Thomas's invented the modern English muffin. The brand has been in American kitchens since 1880. The Nooks and Crannies trademark is real. The company actually holds intellectual property on the specific internal structure of its muffins. For most shoppers, especially older generations, Thomas's does not register as a brand to evaluate. It registers as the category itself. That is precisely why what happened to the formula matters. Turn the package over. Enriched bleached flour, high fructose corn syrup, calcium propionate, DATM, sodium stearoyl lactylate, mono and diglycerides, calcium sulfate, soy lecithin. That is 8 additives and conditioners in a product whose entire identity is built on simplicity and craft. The nooks and crannies that made Thomas's famous were originally produced by a slow, cold fermentation process that allowed gas bubbles to develop unevenly over hours. What produces them now involves a combination of dough conditioners and engineered processing that achieves a visual approximation without the time. Thomas's is owned by Bimbo Bakeries USA, the same parent company that owns Arnold, Sara Lee, Ora Wheat, and dozens of other brands that most consumers still believe are independent. Bimbo generates $22 billion in annual revenue. When Bimbo absorbs a brand, the supply chain follows. Same flour suppliers, same wheat sourcing, same industrial processing network. The Thomas's name stayed on the package. The original process was replaced by whatever could be scaled across a $22 billion production infrastructure. Then came the safety record. In 2022, Thomas's issued a recall on certain English muffin products due to potential contamination with foreign material. The recall covered multiple SKUs distributed across a wide retail footprint. For a brand that built its identity on being the original, the authentic, the one your grandmother trusted, a foreign material contamination recall is not an incidental quality hiccup. It is a systemic quality control failure wearing a heritage label. Number 3. Arnold Sandwich Thins and English Muffins. Arnold has been on American shelves since 1940, when the brand launched its English muffin and sandwich thins lines. Health-conscious shoppers saw it as the answer, whole grains listed prominently. A legacy brand finally translating its reputation into something modern and nutritionally credible. Arnold is owned by Bimbo Bakeries USA. Same parent company as Thomas. Same $22 billion industrial operation. Same wheat sourcing infrastructure. The relationship between these two brands and their corporate owner is invisible to most shoppers because Bimbo has made very deliberate decisions about how much of its ownership to surface on retail packaging. Here is the specific problem with Arnold that goes beyond the standard formula concerns. We could not locate publicly available independent glyphosate test results for Arnold English muffins or sandwich thins. Multiple other brands in the Bimbo portfolio have been independently tested: Thomas's bread products, Sara Lee honey wheat, Ora Wheat whole grain, and those results have been published by independent laboratory databases and consumer advocacy organizations. Arnold, from the same parent company, with access to the same sourcing network, has no disclosed independent residue testing we could find anywhere. A company that generates $22 billion in revenue and voluntarily publishes no glyphosate testing data on one of its flagship premium lines is making a choice. That choice is not reassurance. It is a question the company has decided you do not need answered. The ingredient panel adds context. DAT-M, calcium propionate, sodium stearoyl lactylate, cultured wheat flour used as an acidulant that mimics the flavor of natural fermentation without requiring any actual fermentation time. The slices are geometrically uniform. The texture holds for weeks at room temperature. Real bread baked with whole grains and honest fermentation does not behave like that. Arnold carries a consumer rating that consistently reflects complaints about texture, off flavor, and quality that declines noticeably after the first day of opening. 85 years of brand equity, no public test data, a corporate parent that owns its two nearest competitors on the same shelf. That combination is not a coincidence you should ignore while reaching for a muffin. Number 2. Trader Joe's Multigrain English Muffins. Trader Joe's has spent decades building the image of a store that is categorically on your side. Interesting sourcing, smaller store footprint, private label products that feel independent and considered. The Trader Joe's brand has become shorthand for a kind of consumer that reads labels and asks questions. Reaching for a Trader Joe's English muffin feels like an informed choice made by someone who has already done the work. Here is what the label tells you when you actually do the work. Enriched bleached flour as the base. Calcium propionate. Sodium stearoyl lactylate, DAT-M, soybean oil. The multigrain marketing is carried almost entirely by the addition of oat bran and millet in quantities that appear on the label well after the processed white flour base and the emulsifier stack. The grains listed prominently on the front packaging are present in the formulation, but they are present in the way parsley is present in a processed soup, a label contribution that does not change what you are fundamentally eating. What makes Trader Joe's particularly significant on this list is the expectation gap. A shopper buying Thomas's knows they are buying an industrial product at an industrial price from a company that has always been mass market. A shopper buying Trader Joe's multigrain English muffins has extended to that product the trust they have in the store that sold it to them. That trust is priced into every Trader Joe's house label, and it is not always earned. Trader Joe's does not manufacture its own products. Every private label item is produced by a contract manufacturer under terms that Trader Joe's controls but rarely discloses. The identity of whoever is producing the English muffin line and the sourcing standards that govern that production is not information the company surfaces. You are trusting the Trader Joe's brand to have applied its sourcing standards to a manufacturer it has not named. That is a significant extension of confidence for a product whose ingredient panel does not justify it. Number 1. Whole Foods 365 Organic English Muffins. Amazon owns Whole Foods. Whole Foods sells 365 brand organic English muffins. The product carries a USDA organic seal. It sits in a store that has built its entire retail identity around what it refuses to sell. Their published list of unacceptable ingredients contains over 80 substances. Every aspect of the store experience communicates one message: here, the standard is different. Now read the ingredient panel on the 365 organic English muffins. Organic enriched wheat flour, organic cane sugar, DTM, calcium propionate, soy lecithin. Organic cultured wheat flour used as an acidulant, calcium propionate in a product sold under the Whole Foods house brand. DTM, a synthetic dough conditioner, in a product whose retail context implies it was made with values that would reject exactly this kind of additive. The USDA organic seal on the front verifies that the wheat was grown without synthetic pesticides. It does not verify that the finished muffin was made without synthetic additives in the processing stage. That gap between what the certification covers and what the ingredient panel contains is the gap Whole Foods is relying on you not to examine. Amazon acquired Whole Foods in 2017 for $13.7 billion. Multiple former executives, including Errol Schweitzer, a former vice president who spent 14 years at the company, have publicly described what changed internally after the acquisition. More centralized supply chains. More decisions driven by logistics metrics rather than ingredient standards. Sourcing philosophy replaced by sourcing efficiency. Independent glyphosate testing on Whole Foods 365 brand whole wheat sandwich bread. From the same private label, same sourcing infrastructure, returned over 1,040 parts per billion in independent laboratory testing. Among the highest figures recorded for any organic labeled consumer bread product in any database we reviewed. The English muffin line operates through the same 365 brand supply chain. There is no independently published glyphosate testing on the English muffin product specifically. What there is a parent company with a documented contamination pattern in its organic house brand and no published commitment to close that gap. Reviews of 365 organic English muffins consistently describe texture closer to a foam disc than a bread product. Dense in the wrong direction. Crumbling rather than tearing. No genuine nook and cranny structure. A chemical finish on the aftertaste that real organic fermentation does not produce. You did everything right. You paid the premium. You chose the store with the reputation. You picked the house brand organic option because you trusted what the store stood for. The ingredient panel contains a synthetic dough conditioner, a mold inhibitor, and a heritage of testing data from its own product line that should make any careful shopper read twice before putting it in the cart. A retailer that built its entire identity around refusing to compromise and then puts datum and calcium propionate in its organic house brand is not the retailer it has spent 30 years telling you it is. That earns the number 1 position on this list. Now that you know what to put back, here are the 3 brands that looked at the same shelves and made a different choice. Best option number 3. Rudy's Organic Bakery English Muffins. Rudy's has been baking in Boulder, Colorado since 1976. The brand built its identity on organic ingredients before organic was a marketing category. It did not add organic when organic became profitable. It started there. Open a package of Rudy's Organic English Muffins and read the complete ingredient list. Organic whole wheat flour, water. Organic cane syrup, yeast, sea salt. Organic sunflower oil, organic vinegar. No calcium propionate, no datum, no sodium stearoyl lactylate, no synthetic dough conditioners, no mold inhibitors beyond the natural acidity of organic vinegar. The list has 8 items. Every one of them is recognizable as food. Split one and look at the crumb. The nook structure is uneven and genuine, the result of an actual rise rather than a chemically engineered approximation. Toast it and the surface develops real browning Maillard reaction from actual starches interacting with actual heat rather than the uniform pale tan of a conditioner-stabilized industrial muffin. The flavor has a mild tangy note from the organic vinegar that processed muffins cannot replicate because processed muffins do not ferment long enough to develop any flavor at all. Rudi's has been independently certified organic and has maintained that standard across ownership transitions more carefully than most brands in this investigation. Available at Whole Foods, Sprouts, natural grocers, and through online retail. The price is higher than the industrial options on the avoid list. That cost is the organic wheat, the honest fermentation, and the decision not to replace time with chemistry. Best option number 2. Vermont Bread Company English Muffins. Vermont Bread Company has been producing bread in Brattleboro, Vermont since 1977, family-owned. Never acquired by Bimbo, never absorbed into a portfolio alongside 20 other brands being optimized for margin by the same procurement team. The people making sourcing decisions are the same people who built the company and whose names are attached to the product. Their English muffins carry a non-GMO project verified seal and are made without high-fructose corn syrup, without artificial preservatives, and without the synthetic dough conditioner stack that defines the industrial muffins on this list. The ingredient panel is short enough to read in 15 seconds. Organic whole wheat flour, water, yeast, sea salt, honey, sunflower oil, vinegar. That is the complete list for the whole wheat variety. Split one and it tears rather than compresses. The crumb structure pulls apart in the direction of the gluten network rather than collapsing uniformly. These are the physical signatures of a product that was actually fermented and baked rather than chemically assembled. There is a mild sweetness from the honey that reads as genuine rather than manufactured because it is a small quantity of a real ingredient rather than high-fructose corn syrup calibrated to hit a sweetness threshold at minimum cost. Vermont Bread Company distributes primarily in the Northeast. If you are outside that region, availability through specialty retailers and online ordering exists, but it requires more effort than reaching into the bread aisle at a standard grocery chain. That inconvenience is real. It is also what happens when a company has not handed its distribution over to a continental industrial operator in exchange for shelf space and margin compression. Best option number 1. Wilferman's English Muffins. When Samuel Bath Thomas opened his bakery in New York in 1880 and created the modern English muffin, the defining characteristic was time. The dough fermented slowly, the gas bubbles formed irregularly. The crumb structure that resulted, deep, uneven, genuinely pocketed, was a direct product of that fermentation duration and the patience it required. Wilferman's is the closest thing available in American retail to that original approach. Wilferman's English muffins are made in a facility that has maintained the slow fermentation process as a non-negotiable production standard. The muffins are thicker than every other option on this list, substantially thicker, because the dough is allowed to develop fully rather than being forced to rise on an industrial timeline. That thickness is not a novelty feature, it is the physical evidence of a different philosophy. The ingredient list reflects that philosophy. Unbleached flour, water, yeast, salt, non-fat milk, unsalted butter, no datum, no calcium propionate, no sodium stearoyl lactylate, no synthetic preservatives, no dough conditioners. The list is what a home baker would recognize as the components of an English muffin dough. Split one and the nook and cranny structure is immediately distinct from anything else available at retail. Deep, uneven, variable in size, exactly what natural fermentation produces and exactly what chemical shortcuts cannot replicate regardless of how many conditioners are stacked. Toast it and the butter pools in the pockets rather than absorbing flatly into an undifferentiated crumb. That is the whole point of an English muffin. That is what fermentation time actually buys. Wilferman's operates primarily through direct-to-consumer channels and specialty retailers. The price reflects the production cost of a slow fermentation process run by a team that has not traded that process for industrial scalability. It is among the more expensive English muffin options available. It is also among the most straightforward value propositions in the entire category. You are paying for the thing the category was invented to be. Consumer reviews place Wilferman's consistently at the top of every English muffin ranking that prioritizes flavor and texture over price. Food writers and professional bakers who review retail bread products return to it repeatedly as the reference standard against which industrial English muffins should be measured. Not because it is artisan theater, but because it is actually doing what Thomas's did in 1880 and what every other major brand on this list stopped doing somewhere along the way. Here is the single most practical thing you can take from this entire investigation. The next time you are standing in the bread aisle looking at English muffins, before you reach in, do one thing: turn the package over and look for two things on the ingredient list: datum and calcium propionate. If you see both of them, put the package back. Every single brand on the avoid list contains both. Every single brand on the best options list contains neither. That test takes 8 seconds. It does not require memorizing brand histories or corporate ownership structures or parts per billion of anything. Then go one step further. Count the total ingredients. A real English muffin has between 5 and 10 ingredients depending on whether honey, milk, or butter is included. If the list runs past 12 items, the additional entries are almost universally there to compensate for fermentation that was skipped, grain quality that was compromised, or shelf life that needs to be extended beyond what honest ingredients can provide on their own. Real English muffins do not survive 4 weeks at room temperature. Real English muffins do not compress to nothing when you squeeze the bag. Real English muffins do not have crumb structures that look identical from one to the next, because natural fermentation does not produce identical results. Wolferman's is the strongest recommendation if you want to understand what English muffins were designed to be. Rudy's Organic is the most accessible clean option at standard retail price points. Vermont Bread Company is the right answer if you are in the Northeast and care about where your money goes. In the European Union, many of the synthetic dough conditioners used freely in American English muffins carry labeling requirements or usage restrictions that do not exist in the United States. Datem has not been authorized in all EU bread categories. Calcium propionate usage limits are more tightly regulated. The product you are buying in the American bread aisle would look different, and its ingredient panel would be shorter if it were produced for a regulatory environment that took food additive scrutiny more seriously. The labels on the avoid list were built to earn your trust without earning it. The word original, the word natural, the word organic, and the name of a city your grandmother lived in, none of those are regulated claims that require the ingredient panel to back them up. The ingredient panel is where the real information lives. It has been there the whole time. You just needed to know what you were looking for. If this changed how you shop, share it with someone who still grabs the Thomas without checking. They have been buying the heritage of 1880 and receiving the formula of 2024. Now you both know the difference.